The mistake. Lenne Saul was 17, underfed, and too gentle for her own good. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the Empress's palace, but here she was, another earthborn orphan delivered in a cargo shuttle, processed through biometric scanners without anyone even looking her in the eye. The Citadel wasn't built for softness. It was a place where fire and steel determined who lived and who died. Lenne knew she didn't belong. Everyone did. She spoke in whispers, moved like a shadow, and never complained, not even when her hands bled from scrubbing the steel grooves beneath the arena gates where the sand never quite washed clean. It started with a simple mistake. A maintenance order had been mislabeled, sending her to the wrong clearance zone. Too frightened to question a supervisor, she simply nodded and took her supplies, a mop too big for her small hands and a data scroll blinking with symbols she couldn't read. The lower chambers were a maze of black glass and flickering red torches. Few people ever came down here unless commanded, and Lenne quickly understood why. The air felt heavy, electric, with something dangerous lurking just out of sight. She smelled it before she saw anything, not blood or rust, but something primal, like the moment before lightning strikes. Her footsteps echoed as she turned the corner, and then she froze. Chained to massive obsidian anchors was something that shouldn't exist. Varnach, the Empress's deadliest weapon, a wolf-shaped beast 3 meters at the shoulder, his body a wall of matte black muscle. His fangs gleamed like obsidian daggers, and his fur seemed woven with shadows themselves. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, golden, ancient, and blazing like dying stars. She'd heard the stories. This creature had torn through entire fleets, crushed rebellions with his bare claws, and ripped generals apart during public executions. He was death given form, fury made flesh. And now he was staring directly at her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She stood there trembling, still clutching her mop, as the chains groaned under his weight. He rose slowly, shoulders shifting like tectonic plates, and took a step toward her. The restraints that had once snapped power-armored guards like twigs stretched taut. His golden eyes never left hers. That's when Lenne did something that defied all logic, all training, all common sense. She whispered, "You look lonely." The words meant nothing. They were barely audible. But something incredible happened, the growl that should have come, didn't. The beast tilted his massive head, and for just a moment, the fury in his eyes flickered into something else entirely. "Don't worry," she said, her voice small and shaking. "I'll clean around you." And to her amazement, Varnach slowly lowered himself to the ground, never breaking eye contact. As she began to scrub the floor with trembling hands, something impossible happened. Every time her mop passed near his enormous paw, he would gently nudge it back toward her, as if he was trying to help. That night, Lenne returned to her dormitory late and said nothing to anyone. But she didn't sleep, because deep inside, something fundamental had shifted. She had looked into the eyes of the galaxy's most feared monster and seen not bloodlust, but recognition. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single moment of unexpected gentleness had just set in motion events that would shake the very foundations of the Empire. The breach. The next morning, Lenne returned to her normal cleaning assignment in the upper galleries where nobility gathered to watch the gladiatorial games. Her hands worked on autopilot, scrubbing away boot prints and wine stains, but her mind remained in those lower chambers. She kept thinking about Varnach's eyes, the way he hadn't growled, the strange gentleness in his massive paw. She'd imagined it all. She had to have. Monsters like that didn't show kindness to cleaning girls. Then the alarm screamed. Station-wide lockdown. Emergency protocols activated. High-threat apex predator breach. The automated voice echoed through every corridor as blast doors began sealing. Lenne's blood turned to ice. She turned toward the sound of shouting and her world tilted sideways. Varnach wasn't in his cage. He was climbing the ivory steps of the observation wing, bloody chains hanging loose from his collar where the restraint ports had been ripped clean from the walls. People scattered like leaves before a hurricane. Guards raised plasma rifles with shaking hands. One noble woman fainted outright. 2 guards simply dropped their weapons and ran. But the wolf wasn't hunting. He moved through the chaos with purpose, ignoring the screaming crowds, passing directly by potential victims without so much as a snarl. His golden eyes swept the panicking masses until they found what they were looking for. Lenne was kneeling at the far end of the gallery, frantically trying to gather the cleaning supplies she'd dropped when the alarm started. Her hands shook as she clutched a container of cleaning gel, too terrified to move. Varnach walked straight to her and stopped. No roar. No growl. No display of dominance. He simply sat beside her, his massive flank pressing against her shoulder protectively, as if he'd been doing it his entire life. The guards surrounded them, weapons drawn, fingers hovering over triggers. The lead soldier stepped forward, his voice cracking with fear and authority. "Stand aside, girl. That thing will kill us all." Lenne looked up at the circle of weapons pointed at them both. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence, everyone heard it clearly. "Don't shoot. He's not going to hurt anyone. Move away from the beast now," the soldier commanded. That's when Varnach growled. Not at Lenne, at them. The sound was so deep and thunderous that the walls actually cracked. Every electronic device nearby flickered and died. The soldiers stumbled backward, their weapons suddenly feeling very small and inadequate. Lenne stood slowly, her cheeks burning with a mixture of terror and defiance she'd never felt before. Without thinking, she rested her small hand on Varnach's dark fur. "See," she whispered, though her voice carried in the deathly quiet. "Not a monster." Above them, watching through surveillance feeds from her private chambers, Empress Zelthar set down her glass of black wine. Her eyes narrowed with something that might have been interest, or might have been calculation. "Fascinating," she murmured to herself. Then, louder, to her aide, "Summon the girl. And do not attempt to releash the beast." In a galaxy that had learned to bow only to fear, something unprecedented had just occurred. The Empire's most feared weapon had found a reason not to kill. And that reason was a 17-year-old orphan who had smiled at him in the darkness. The foundations of power were about to shift, and no one was prepared for what would come next. The audience. The throne room of Empress Zelthar was not built for comfort. It was built for judgment. Towering pillars of scorched stone lined the chamber, each one etched with the names of rebel houses crushed beneath her rule. The floor was a sheet of polished black crystal that forced everyone who entered to see themselves reflected upside down. Mirrors, the Empress had once said, make truth harder to ignore. Into this chamber of iron and shadows walked a trembling earthborn girl, followed by a god of war trying not to make noise. Varnach padded behind Lenne like a mountain attempting stealth, his dark fur shimmering with barely contained power. The chains still hung from his throat, though no one had dared try to reattach them. His golden eyes stayed fixed not on the Empress, but on the small figure walking ahead of him. Lenne's footsteps made no sound on the crystal floor. She didn't look up at first, she knew who waited at the end of this long walk. Empress Zelthar, the unshaken, the woman who had stared down warlords and made death itself feel polite. The Empress stood slowly. She wore no crown, she didn't need one. Power clung to her like heat to a star. "You," she said softly, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber, "are not what I expected." Lenne bowed awkwardly, almost stumbling. "I'm sorry, Your Radiance." "For what?" Zelthar asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. "For surviving," Lenne said, the words barely audible. The Empress descended the steps with fluid grace, her robes whispering like silk-wrapped blades. She circled the girl once, studying her not with disdain, but with the calculating gaze of someone solving a complex puzzle. Then she stopped in front of Varnach. The wolf had not moved, but his attention was absolute. When the Empress reached out slowly toward Lenne, Varnach's lips pulled back just slightly, showing the tips of fangs that could crush starship hulls. Zelthar chuckled, a sound like distant thunder. So, she said, he would end me to protect you. I didn't ask him to, Lenne said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. That, Zelthar replied, turning away, is the most dangerous part. She walked back to her throne and sat with the fluid grace of a star folding into itself. I have ruled this galaxy for 80 years by breeding loyalty through fear. I chained that beast with plasma and punishment, and he obeyed because pain taught him to obey. Her voice dropped into something closer to curiosity than command. Tell me, earthborn child, what did you offer him that made him follow you? Lenne swallowed hard. Her hands trembled as the words came out cracked but clear. I didn't offer him anything. I just saw him. The throne hall fell silent. Not the calculated silence of diplomacy, but the wide-eyed, breathless stillness of an empire feeling something fundamental shift beneath its feet. Zelthar tapped one finger against her throne's armrest. Once. Twice. Then she smiled, and somehow that was more terrifying than her anger would have been. A girl who gives nothing and earns everything. She raised her voice without needing to increase its volume. From this day forward, she is not to be touched. Not questioned. Not watched. Her path is hers to choose. Lenne stared in disbelief. You're not angry? The Empress's eyes gleamed like suns preparing to flare. Oh, I'm furious, she said softly. You've undone decades of carefully constructed power with one act of gentleness. But empires fall when they stop evolving. She leaned forward slightly. You, girl, are evolution. And evolution cannot be stopped. As if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life, Varnach settled beside Lenne's feet with a contented sigh that seemed to make the very air around him warmer. By the time they left the throne room, rumors were already spreading faster than light itself. The pale girl who walked with wolves. The earthborn who had tamed the untamable. The cleaning girl who had somehow become the most protected person in the galaxy. But not everyone was pleased with this turn of events. In the shadows of the noble quarter, old resentment stirred, and ambitious men began making dangerous plans. The conspiracy. Word traveled fast in the Citadel. By evening, entire sectors whispered Lenne's name. Some called her the Wolf Keeper. Others whispered the Earthborn Flame or the Pale Voice. The boldest called her Mother of Beasts, though never where the guards could hear. Her quarters had been hastily relocated to the royal wing, a suite larger than the entire dormitory she'd shared with 50 other orphans. But luxury felt strange when you'd spent your life scrubbing floors. Lenne sat on silk cushions that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, while Varnach sprawled beside her like a living shadow. Not everyone celebrated her rise. In the mirror gardens of the eastern wing, noble Valisor Targon spat blood into his wine and watched the security feeds with burning eyes. He was the son of the Eastern Dominion, bearer of 3 ritual scars, and he had been destined for greatness. More importantly, he had once faced Varnach in ceremonial combat, the only person to survive such an encounter, though only because the beast had been recalled mid-lunge. Ever since that day, he had burned to finish what was interrupted. The wolf was supposed to be his kill, his trophy, his path to legend. Instead, a nobody-cleaning girl had waltzed in and somehow made the creature heel like a trained pet. She stole my fury, he muttered, crushing his wine glass in his grip. She stole my destiny. Valisor was not alone in his resentment. A dozen minor nobles gathered in his chambers that night, their faces twisted with envy and wounded pride. How could they maintain their carefully constructed hierarchies when an earthborn orphan commanded more respect than bloodlines stretching back centuries? The Empress has lost her mind, whispered Lady Serana, her voice dripping with venom. Giving power to some nobody from the gutters. It's unnatural, agreed Lord Corvin. Beasts should serve their masters, not coddle peasant girls. Valisor smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then perhaps it's time we reminded everyone of the natural order. The beast may have gone soft, but it still bleeds. And when it dies, the girl's protection dies with it. The plan they hatched was elegant in its simplicity. The arena games were scheduled for the next evening, a grand spectacle to celebrate the Empress's victory over the Outer Rim rebels. Traditionally, Varnach would be displayed in his chains as a reminder of imperial power. But what if those chains were sabotaged? What if the beast, driven mad by hidden pain stimulators, turned on the crowd? In the chaos, who would notice one small girl being trampled? Who would question the heroic nobles who put down the rampaging monster to save innocent lives? Accidents happen, Valasar said, his scarred hands already reaching for his ceremonial warblade. Even to the Empress's pets. Meanwhile, in her new quarters, Lenne couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Varnach had been restless all day, his golden eyes constantly scanning the shadows. When she asked him what was bothering him, he simply pressed closer to her side, a low rumble of unease vibrating through his massive frame. "You sense it too, don't you?" she whispered, running her fingers through his dark fur. "Something's coming." As if in response to her words, a maintenance worker appeared at her door, a slight man with nervous eyes who claimed to need access to check the environmental systems. Behind him stood two guards she didn't recognize, their hands resting too casually on their weapon hilts. Varnach rose to his feet, and suddenly the room felt much smaller. His lips pulled back in a silent snarl that made the maintenance worker take an involuntary step backward. "Perhaps," the man said, his voice cracking slightly, "we could return tomorrow." As they retreated down the corridor, Lenne felt ice in her veins. She had spent her life being invisible, ignored, overlooked. But now she was learning that visibility could be far more dangerous than obscurity. The next morning brought news that made her blood run cold. The arena games had been moved up. Tonight, Varnach would be displayed before the cheering crowds, chained and helpless while the nobles who resented her watched from their privileged boxes. And Lenne, as his handler, would be expected to stand beside him in the center of it all. She looked at Varnach, and he looked back at her with those ancient, knowing eyes. They both understood what was really happening. This wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be an execution. The final stand. The arena floor was vast, a circle of white sand surrounded by towering walls lined with cheering spectators. But tonight felt different. Lenne could sense the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. In the noble boxes, she spotted familiar faces, Valasar and his conspirators, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Varnach stood beside her in the center of the arena, apparently secured by massive chains that gleamed silver under the spotlights. To the crowd, he looked properly restrained, properly displayed. But Lenne could feel the subtle tremor in the metal links. These weren't the usual restraints. Something had been done to them, something that made her stomach clench with dread. "Citizens of the Empire." Empress Zelthar's voice boomed across the arena from her elevated throne. "Tonight we celebrate not just victory, but evolution. Behold, the bond between predator and peace." The crowd cheered, but there was an edge to it, a hunger for something more violent than a simple display. That's when Lenne noticed the small device hidden beneath Varnach's collar, a pain stimulator, designed to drive him into a rage. Valasar was already rising from his seat, his hand on his ceremonial blade, ready to play the hero when the accident began. But he had underestimated one crucial thing: the bond between Lenne and Varnach wasn't built on chains or commands. It was built on trust. "It's okay," Lenne whispered, placing her hand on Varnach's flank as the hidden device began to pulse with electric agony. "I know it hurts. But we're in this together." Instead of flying into a rage, Varnach did something unprecedented. He looked at her with those golden eyes and made a choice. The pain was meant to make him lose control, but her presence gave him something to hold on to. He stood perfectly still, letting the agony wash over him without moving a muscle. The conspirators' plan was falling apart. Valasar activated the device to maximum power, but Varnach simply pressed closer to Lenne, drawing strength from her courage rather than being driven mad by the pain. "Now." Valisur shouted, unable to wait any longer. The beast is malfunctioning. We must act. He leaped down into the arena, followed by 6 other nobles, their weapons drawn. Stand back, girl. We'll handle this monster. But as Valisur raised his blade, something beautiful and terrible happened. Lenne stepped between them, her arms spread wide to protect Varnach. No, she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. The only monsters here are the ones holding swords. Varnach's chains snapped, not from rage, but from choice. He could have broken them at any time, but he had waited for this moment, waited until his gentle friend needed him most. He rose to his full height, no longer a chained beast but a guardian protecting what he loved. The nobles found themselves facing not a pain-maddened animal, but 3 meters of perfectly controlled fury. Varnach's growl shook dust from the arena walls, and his golden eyes promised death to anyone who tried to harm the girl behind him. Impossible, Valisur breathed. It should be mindless with rage. Pain, Lenne said softly, though her voice somehow reached every corner of the arena, doesn't control you when you have someone worth protecting. The Empress stood slowly in her box, and when she spoke, her voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Valisur Targon, she said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. You have betrayed not just your Empress, but the very evolution of power itself. You tried to destroy something beautiful because you could not understand it. The noble's face went white as the arena guard surrounded him and his co-conspirators. Your radiance, we were trying to protect you from. From what? Zelthar's eyes blazed. From the revelation that strength need not come from fear. That loyalty earned is worth more than loyalty beaten into submission. She turned to address the entire arena. Let this be understood throughout the galaxy. This girl and her companion represent a new age. They are under the protection not just of the throne, but of evolution itself. As the conspirators were led away in chains, Lenne felt Varnach settle beside her with a contented rumble. The device hidden in his collar sparked once and died, its purpose thwarted by something more powerful than technology, the simple choice to trust rather than surrender to pain. Later, as they walked through the Citadel's gardens under twin moons, Lenne reflected on how much had changed. She was no longer a nobody cleaning girl, and Varnach was no longer just a weapon of war. They had become something new together, proof that even in a galaxy built on fear, gentleness could not only survive but transform everything it touched. You know, Lenne said, scratching behind Varnach's ear as he sprawled in the moonlight, I never did finish cleaning those lower chambers. The great beast made a sound that might have been laughter, and somewhere in the distance, the Empire continued its ancient dance of power and politics. But in this quiet garden, under stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, 2 unlikely friends had discovered something more valuable than dominion. They had discovered that true strength came not from inspiring fear, but from choosing love in the face of impossible odds. And in a galaxy that had forgotten such lessons, that made them the most powerful force of all. The end.